On the night of August 17, 1799, the British merchant vessel Cornelia recorded in its official log a sighting that would never be satisfactorily explained. The entry, written in Captain Edmund Hartwell's precise hand, describes a vessel of unknown origin maintaining impossible heading against prevailing winds. The ship's navigator, Thomas Beckett, added a supplementary note that was later struck from the record. No sail configuration known to any man aboard could account for the observed movement. What began as a routine Caribbean trading passage became something else entirely, a documented encounter with a phenomenon that would surface again and again in those waters, always following the same pattern, always leaving behind the same unexplained evidence. The official inquiry concluded equipment malfunction and atmospheric distortion. The surviving crew members told a different story, one that matched accounts from vessels dating back decades and forward into years yet to come. The Cornelia departed Port Royal, Jamaica on August 12, 1799, carrying a standard manifest of sugar, rum, and mahogany bound for Portsmouth. Her crew of 32 men represented the typical composition of Caribbean merchant service. Experienced sailors from a dozen nations, hardened by tropical storms and pirate encounters, skeptical of superstition and focused on practical seamanship. Captain Hartwell maintained discipline through competence rather than cruelty, keeping detailed records of wind patterns, current behavior, and celestial navigation that still exist in maritime archives. The first 3 days proceeded without incident. Trade winds held steady from the northeast, the familiar pattern that had guided ships across these waters for centuries. The crew worked in practiced rhythm, adjusting sail trim, scrubbing deck planking already bleached white by relentless sun, maintaining the 1,000 small systems that kept a wooden vessel functional in salt-saturated air.
Heat radiated from every surface during daylight hours. The water stretched in all directions, deep Caribbean blue, fading to turquoise near scattered cays, then darkening again over the profound trenches that scored the ocean floor between island chains. By the afternoon of August 15th, subtle changes began to register in the ship's logs. Hartwell noted a gradual shift in sea state that didn't correlate with wind speed or barometric pressure. The surface texture changed, becoming smoother, almost glassy in patches, while maintaining normal chop elsewhere. The helmsman reported difficulty holding course, describing the wheel as responding sluggishly, as though current ran contrary to all charts. Water temperature readings showed inconsistent variations, dropping several degrees within ship lengths, then returning to normal tropical warmth. The atmosphere itself seemed to thicken as the sun descended on August 16th. Visibility remained clear, no fog, no haze, no approaching storm front. Yet light behaved strangely. The horizon line became indistinct, not obscured but somehow uncertain, as though the boundary between sea and sky had softened. Stars emerged that evening in their usual configuration, but several crew members independently noted that familiar constellations appeared subtly displaced, shifted by degrees that couldn't be attributed to latitude or time of year. Navigator Beckett triple-checked his calculations, comparing celestial readings against dead reckoning and known landmarks. The numbers didn't align. The ship's position, verified through multiple methodologies, suggested they occupied 2 locations simultaneously, one matching expected progress along their planned route, another indicating displacement to the northwest by nearly 15 nautical miles. He presented these findings to Hartwell after the evening watch change, spreading charts across the captain's desk under lamplight that seemed to flicker despite no perceptible air movement in the cabin. That night, the sea fell almost completely calm. The usual sounds of a vessel underway, creaking rigging, water against hull, wind in canvas, diminished to near silence. In that unnatural quiet, other sounds became audible. A deep, rhythmic resonance, felt more through the ship's timbers than heard through air. A vibration that cycled on intervals too regular to be wave action, too subtle to be geological. Several crew members came on deck between watch rotations, drawn by instinct rather than alarm, standing at the rails and staring out into darkness that seemed to possess unusual depth, unusual texture. The following morning brought no conventional weather change. No clouds, no shift in wind direction, no drop in temperature that would signal a front. Yet every experienced sailor aboard recognized something had altered in the surrounding environment. The quality of light on the water surface, the behavior of seabirds that had been following the ship. They'd vanished overnight, every one. The complete absence of other vessels on an ocean that usually showed distant sails on most horizons. The Cornelia sailed through water and air that felt increasingly isolated, increasingly remote from normal maritime traffic patterns and natural phenomena. The sighting occurred at 11:47 p.m. on August 17th, under a moon 3 days past full that cast silver light across calm seas. Second Mate William Crawford had the watch, along with 4 able seamen whose names appear in the official log. Crawford's initial report describes light source bearing nor-northwest, approximately 4 miles distant, exhibiting movement inconsistent with known vessel under sail or oar. The light appeared not as a single point, but as a diffuse glow emanating from below the horizon line, as though a ship sailed in a valley between waves that didn't exist on the calm sea. It brightened and dimmed in patterns that suggested occlusion, something passing in front of the source, or the source itself rotating. But the rhythm of these changes didn't match any lighthouse or signal system in use. Too slow for signals, too irregular for mechanical rotation, too purposeful to be natural phosphorescence. Crawford summoned the captain. By the time Hartwell reached the quarterdeck, several off-watch crew had emerged, drawn by the same instinct that brings people to rails when something breaks the ocean's normal pattern. Hartwell studied the phenomenon through his spyglass, a quality instrument that had served him for 15 years of night navigation. Through the lens, details became more disturbing rather than more clear. The light source revealed structure, vertical elements that could be masts, horizontal lines that suggested rigging or yards. But the proportions seemed incorrect. The spacing between apparent mast positions exceeded any ship design in the Royal Navy's registry or merchant fleet documentation. The sail plan, if it was a sail plan, showed configurations that violated basic principles of wind capture and load distribution. And the movement, the actual displacement of the vessel through water, proceeded against the wind with no visible means of propulsion. Beckett took bearings, marking the phenomenon's position relative to fixed stars. He documented a northwesterly heading that would, if maintained, drive the vessel directly onto the barrier reefs surrounding a small, uninhabited key 12 miles distant. At the current apparent speed, estimated at 7 knots based on wake displacement visible in moonlight, impact would occur before dawn. Yet the heading never wavered, and the speed never varied despite constant wind from the northeast that should have driven any sail-powered vessel in the opposite direction. For 26 minutes, both vessels maintained parallel courses, separated by 4 miles of unusually calm water. During that time, crew members on the Cornelia reported progressive sensory distortions. The sound of the other vessel, because it did make sound, arrived not as normal maritime noise, but as something deeper and more complex. Hull displacement through water, yes, but overlaid with harmonics that shouldn't exist in wooden construction and hemp rigging. Metal grinding in ways that predated the industrial ironclad designs, still decades away from implementation. And underneath it all, that same deep resonance that had vibrated through the Cornelia's timbers the previous night, now stronger, now clearly emanating from the direction of the distant light. Then the phenomenon altered course, not gradually, not through the wide turning radius required by a sailing vessel of the observed size. It pivoted, almost mechanically, rotating on its axis while maintaining position. The light source swung through 90 degrees in less than a minute, bringing the vessel, if it was a vessel, to a heading that pointed directly at the Cornelia. The distance began to close. Beckett's measurements showed approach speed increasing from 7 knots to 9, then to 12, velocities that exceeded any wind-powered ship's capabilities in the current conditions. The crew fell silent, watching the light grow larger, watching structure emerge from the glow. Hartwell ordered all hands to stations, not for combat but for emergency sail handling. He didn't know what response the situation demanded, but maintaining maneuverability seemed prudent. At a distance of 2 miles, details became visible even without spyglass assistance. The approaching vessel showed damage, or something like damage, irregular profiles along what should be smooth hull lines, interruptions in the rigging pattern, areas where the diffuse glow dimmed or vanished entirely, as though sections of the structure had been removed or never existed. Yet it maintained course and speed with mechanical precision, cutting through water that showed no conventional wake pattern. Instead of the white foam and disturbed surface a normal hull would generate, the water around this vessel appeared compressed, darkened, moving in ways that suggested displacement, but of some medium denser than seawater. 1 mile. The sound intensified, that grinding, that metallic resonance, overlaid now with something that resembled wind in rigging, but wrong, the pitch wrong, the rhythm wrong. Several crew members pressed hands to ears, not against volume but against the invasive quality of the sound itself, the way it seemed to bypass normal hearing and resonate directly in bone structure. 1/2 mile. Individual elements became distinguishable. Vertical posts that might be mass but showed no taper, no proper proportional reduction toward their tops. Horizontal elements supporting empty space where sails should be but weren't, or were present in some form invisible to moonlight observation. And movement aboard the vessel, figures or shadows or structural elements that shifted position in ways that suggested human activity, but followed patterns no sailor would recognize. Then, at a distance, Beckett later calculated as precisely 840 feet, the phenomenon stopped. Complete cessation of forward movement, no gradual deceleration, simply stationary where moment before it had been approaching at speed. The sound cut out. The light dimmed to a fraction of its previous intensity, and in the sudden silence, other sounds became audible from the direction of the vessel. Impacts, as though heavy objects struck hollow spaces, reverberating through empty holds or damaged hull sections. For 7 minutes, both vessels remained motionless on a calm sea. The crew of the Cornelia stood at their stations, hands on lines, ready for orders that didn't come, because Hartwell himself stood transfixed, studying the phenomenon through his glass,
trying to correlate what his eyes reported with anything in his 3 decades of maritime experience. Then light bloomed across the other vessel's deck, sudden, intense, white, rather than the previous diffuse glow. It moved in a sweep from bow to stern, illuminating for just seconds the actual structure beneath the distortion. What the crew saw in that moment would appear in official statements and private journals with remarkable consistency. A ship, yes, but configured wrong, proportioned wrong, with features that combined design elements from different eras or different purposes entirely. The white light extinguished as abruptly as it had appeared, plunging the phenomenon back into dimmer illumination. But now, something had changed in its behavior pattern. Hartwell ordered helm adjustment,
intending to put distance between vessels, to execute what the Royal Navy termed a cautious withdrawal from unknown contact. The helmsman spun the wheel. The rudder responded. The Cornelia began her turn. The other vessel matched the maneuver exactly. Not a responsive turn, not a tactical counter. A perfect mirror of the Cornelia's movement, executed simultaneously, maintaining the 840-foot separation with mechanical precision. Hartwell tested this twice more, ordering course changes port and starboard. Each time, the phenomenon matched instantaneously, as though receiving the orders the same moment the crew did, or as though both vessels were connected by some invisible tether that maintained fixed relative positions. The wind died completely. Sails went slack, hanging vertical from yards in air so still that smoke from the cook's galley fire rose in a perfect column before dispersing at some upper altitude boundary. Temperature dropped, not dramatically, but noticeably, the tropical night air taking on a chill more typical of higher latitudes. Beckett recorded the change as 7 degrees in 12 minutes, an atmospheric shift that violated all regional climate patterns. The water around both vessels began to exhibit disturbing behavior. Bioluminescent organisms, the normal microscopic plankton that creates phosphorescent glow in tropical waters, appeared in unusual concentration and pattern. Instead of random sparkling or wake trail illumination, they organized into circular formations surrounding both ships, creating rings of cold blue light that pulsed in synchronization with that deep resonance that had returned, now strong enough to rattle metal fittings and vibrate standing water in buckets on deck. At 1:33 a.m., 3 crew members reported illness simultaneously. Not conventional seasickness, these were experienced sailors who'd weathered Caribbean hurricanes, but disorientation, pressure in ears and sinuses, difficulty focusing vision. The ship's surgeon, Dr. Marcus Pemberton, documented symptoms consistent with rapid altitude change or barometric instability, yet ship's instruments show no such variation. By 2 a.m., more than half the crew exhibited similar effects to varying degrees. The other vessel's light began to pulse, slow cycles from dim to bright that didn't correlate with any signal system. Each pulse seemed to pull at something, to create pressure differential in the air. Canvas stirred despite no wind. Loose rigging twitched and swayed. And water sounds changed, the normal slap and gurgle of ocean against hull becoming something thicker, more viscous, as though sea composition itself was altering. At 2:47 a.m., the phenomenon moved again, not toward or away from the Cornelia, but in a slow circuit around her, maintaining that exact 840-foot radius, rotating around the merchant vessel like a moon orbiting a planet. The circuit took 18 minutes to complete. During that time, the crew tracked its progress, watching structure and light pass stern to port, to bow to starboard to stern again, describing a perfect circle on calm water. As it circled, the bioluminescence intensified. The blue rings expanded, overlapping, creating patterns that resembled concentric ripples but moved wrong, propagating inward rather than outward, converging on both vessels rather than spreading from them. And in those patterns, in the spaces between the glowing lines, darkness became absolute. Not simple absence of light, but darkness that seemed to possess substance, that appeared to resist the moon's illumination. On the second circuit, sounds began emanating from beneath the Cornelia herself. Impacts on the hull, scraping along the keel, pressure changes that made the entire ship's structure groan. Crew members hung over rails with lanterns, trying to see what caused the sounds, seeing only dark water and those pulsing blue patterns. But the impacts continued, moving systematically from bow to stern, as though something large and solid passed underneath, measuring, cataloging,
testing the vessel's integrity. Hartwell ordered soundings taken. The leadsman heaved his weighted line, calling depths. The lead dropped through normal fathoms, 10, 15, 20. Then the line went slack. Not grounded, the opposite. The weight had found no bottom within the line's length, more than 100 fathoms in waters that charts indicated should be 70 fathoms deep. The leadsman pulled the line up. The weight returned coated not in bottom sand or mud, but in some substance that resembled oxidized metal, a greenish-black residue that flaked away when touched and left stains on skin that wouldn't wash clean with seawater. By the third circuit, crew members began reporting visual phenomena beyond the immediate vessels. Distant lights on horizons that shouldn't exist. No land, no ships registered in those directions. Flashes beneath the water surface, deep down, too regular to be lightning, too sustained to be phosphorescence. And movement in the clouds above, despite the fact that the sky remained largely clear. Shadows passing overhead, occulting stars in patterns that suggested massive objects at high altitude.
Though nothing visible occupied those spaces when crew members looked directly upward. The phenomenon completed its third circuit at 4:12 a.m., then stopped again at its original position, precisely 840 feet bearing northwest from the Cornelia. The circling ceased. The bioluminescence dimmed but didn't disappear. The deep resonance dropped to barely perceptible levels. Both vessels sat motionless on a sea that had become mirror smooth, reflecting moon and stars with perfect clarity, creating the disorienting impression that both ships floated in space between earth and sky, with no certain reference for up or down. In that strange calm, new sounds became audible from the other vessel. Mechanical sounds, gears, or something like gears, though no ship in 1799 carried machinery complex enough to generate such noise. Hydraulic sounds, fluid under pressure moving through channels, though hydraulic systems wouldn't be developed for marine use for another half-century. And underneath it all, something organic, breathing perhaps, or rhythmic compression and expansion of some large structure, as though the vessel itself possessed respiratory function. The light began to change color. The previous white-yellow glow shifted toward blue, then toward colors that crew members struggled to describe in later testimonies. Like deep water, one would say. Like metal heated past red, another would offer. Like no color I can name, a third would conclude. The shift lasted several minutes, cycling through these undefined hues, bathing both vessels in illumination that rendered everything visible, but somehow unfamiliar, as though common objects became strange simply by being seen under that impossible spectrum. Then, at 4:47 a.m., the first structural failure occurred aboard the Cornelia. The main topmast, a spar that had been installed new in Port Royal 2 weeks prior, split along its length with a crack like cannon fire. It didn't break from stress or wind load. The wood simply separated, fibers dividing as though sawn, the spar remaining in place but now compromised, no longer capable of bearing sail loads. Within minutes, similar failures appeared in 3 other spars and a section of deck railing. All clean splits, all in recently installed timber, as though something was selectively degrading wood that hadn't yet been fully saturated with salt and weathered by sun. Dr. Pemberton reported additional crew illness, now 15 men showing severe symptoms, unable to maintain stations, lying in the forecastle with symptoms that included temporal disorientation, reporting time passing at different rates, unable to agree on how long various events had lasted. The surgeon's chronometer, a precision instrument, appeared to function normally, but crew members' pocket watches had begun showing wildly divergent times, despite being synchronized the previous morning. At 5:16 a.m., with false dawn just beginning to pale the eastern horizon, the phenomenon's light increased to levels that caused physical pain to look at directly. It became a white-blue flare, casting shadows so sharp that every line and fitting aboard the Cornelia stood in relief like objects under noon sun. The heat from that light was palpable. Crew members felt skin tighten, felt moisture evaporate from exposed surfaces. Yet when Pemberton measured air temperature, it had dropped another 6 degrees. The heat came from the light itself, not from warmed air. In that intense illumination, the other vessel's true structure became momentarily visible. Hartwell would later describe it in his private journal as a configuration that violated principles of maritime architecture while simultaneously perfecting them. Every line serving a purpose I couldn't comprehend, every proportion calculated for some function beyond mere ocean transit. The hull showed neither wood planking nor metal plating, but something in between or beyond both, with surface properties that reflected light in ways that suggested fluidity despite obvious solidity. The rigging, in that brief clear view, appeared to function not by wind capture, but by some other principle entirely. The vertical elements weren't masts, but structures that channeled or directed force through mechanisms invisible or incomprehensible. Horizontal elements held not sails but spaces, geometric voids that seemed to trap or manipulate air, or something else that flowed like air but possessed different properties. And the figures aboard, they were there, definitively present in that moment of illumination, but describing them defeated every witness who tried. Human proportions but wrong scale, human movement but wrong rhythm. Working aboard the vessel with purpose and coordination, attending to tasks that resembled normal shipboard activity, but served functions no one aboard the Cornelia could identify. The light pulsed twice, each pulse generating pressure waves that rolled across the water's surface visibly, concentric rings of compressed air that struck the Cornelia's hull with physical force, pushing the vessel sideways through the water despite no wind to drive her. Equipment tore loose, barrels broke their lashings. Men grabbed for handholds as the deck tilted under forces that came from no rational direction. On the second pulse, the sound intensified beyond tolerable levels. It became not just audible, but physical, a vibration that penetrated through ear protection, through skin, through bone, directly into the nervous system. Several crew members collapsed. Others cried out, unable to help themselves, the sound forcing involuntary vocalization. Blood began to seep from the ears of 3 men standing nearest the bow, closest to the phenomenon. Then, the water between both vessels began to behave impossibly. The surface didn't rise or fall, it deformed, bending upward in the center, as though pressure from below pushed against gravity, creating a convex lens of water that climbed higher, higher, until it formed a wall 6 feet tall stretching between the ships. Water that should disperse but didn't, maintaining coherent structure despite violating every principle of fluid dynamics. Through that wall of water, still transparent, still clear despite its impossible form, both vessels became visible to each other with peculiar clarity. And through it, something else became visible. A shadow, or a presence, or a gap in reality where normal physical laws had been suspended. It occupied the space between vessels, neither in the water nor in the air, but somehow in both simultaneously. Size impossible to judge when normal reference points had become uncertain.
form impossible to describe when observation itself seemed to alter what was being observed. The experience lasted either seconds or minutes. Crew members couldn't agree. Their temporal sense had become too disrupted. But all agreed on the sensation it produced. The presence regarding them, studying them with intelligence that was absolutely certain, but absolutely alien. Assessing the Cornelia and her crew with purposes that had nothing to do with threat or curiosity or any human comprehensible motivation. Then the wall of water collapsed. It fell not gradually, but all at once. Tons of seawater returning to the surface in a single impact that generated waves radiating outward from the collapse point. Waves that rocked both vessels violently, despite the relatively small displacement. The light from the phenomenon dimmed to previous levels. The sound dropped below painful thresholds, and the presence, whatever had occupied that space between vessels, withdrew or departed, or ceased to manifest in any way crew senses could detect. The phenomenon began to move, not circling, not approaching, departing. It executed another of those impossible instant pivots, rotating to a southwesterly heading, then accelerated.
Crew members with functioning watches later calculated speeds exceeding 20 knots, achieved with no visible means of propulsion, maintained across absolutely calm water. Within 8 minutes, it had vanished below the horizon, the glow diminishing until it became indistinguishable from the first light of actual dawn spreading across the eastern sky. The Cornelia remained motionless until full daylight, her crew slowly recovering function, assessing damage, trying to reconcile what they'd experienced with any rational framework. The structural failures in spars and railing proved real and required immediate repair before the vessel could safely carry full sail. The medical effects, bleeding, disorientation, temporal confusion, gradually diminished over the following hours, but left lingering impacts. 3 crew members would experience permanent hearing damage. 7 would report chronic equilibrium problems for months afterward. Dr. Pemberton collected samples of the substance that had coated the sounding lead. He sealed it in a glass jar, documenting its properties. Resembles oxidized copper or bronze, yet tests show no metallic content. Leaves persistent stains on organic material. Produces mild burning sensation on skin contact, resolving without permanent damage. That sample would eventually reach the Royal Society in London, where it would be studied and catalogued as unidentifiable marine deposit, then filed away and lost in the archives. Beckett compiled his navigational data, producing a report that showed the Cornelia's position throughout the encounter. His calculations revealed something disturbing. During the 6 hours of contact with the phenomenon, the ship had drifted 32 nautical miles from her expected position, movement that occurred despite no wind, no current strong enough to generate that displacement, and no power from the ship's own propulsion. The vessel had been moved, or had moved, through forces that remained unexplained.
When the Cornelia reached Portsmouth 6 weeks later, Hartwell submitted his official report. The Admiralty response was swift and dismissive. Atmospheric conditions, crew fatigue, possible contamination of water stores leading to collective hallucination. The incident was attributed to natural phenomena misinterpreted under stress and darkness. No investigation followed. No follow-up queries were issued. But Hartwell's private journal, preserved by his descendants and only recently made available to researchers, tells a different story. He documented that the phenomenon had been sighted before, multiple vessels, multiple years, always in the same region of the Caribbean. He cited conversations with other captains, informal exchanges in port taverns, accounts that never made official reports but circulated among experienced mariners who'd worked those waters for decades. The pattern was consistent. Calm nights, unusual atmospheric conditions, vessels appearing that didn't respond to wind or current, close approaches, sometimes circling behavior,
sometimes extended observation periods, effects on crew health, equipment failures, temporal distortions, and always, the phenomenon departed before full revelation, maintaining just enough distance, just enough obscurity that definitive documentation remained impossible. Archive research over the past 2 centuries has uncovered 17 separate accounts matching the Cornelia incident in key details. They span from 1743 to 1876, all in the same broad region between Jamaica and Hispaniola, all involving similar light sources, similar vessel descriptions, similar effects. Then the reports stop. No sightings after 1876 in available records. Either the phenomenon ceased, or ships encountering it stopped surviving to report it, or reporting methods changed in ways that buried such accounts under different classifications.
The site of the original encounter, calculated from Beckett's meticulous position notes, lies over the Cayman Trench, where ocean floor drops to depths exceeding 25,000 feet. Modern sonar mapping of the region has revealed unusual features, geometric patterns on the trench floor too regular to be geological, metallic signatures in sediment samples that don't match any known mineral deposit, and acoustic anomalies where sound behaves contrary to all established propagation models. In 2003, a research submersible conducting deep-sea biology surveys in the trench reported instrument malfunctions at approximately 18,000 feet depth. The malfunctions included compass deviations, sonar interference patterns, and pressure sensor readings that suggested the submersible occupied 2 depths simultaneously. The anomalies lasted 6 minutes, then resolved. The research team attributed the effects to equipment failure, though all systems tested normally upon return to surface. The Cornelia's log, Beckett's calculations, Hartwell's journal, Pemberton's sample, these artifacts exist in scattered archives. Separately, they prove nothing. Together, they document an encounter with something that operated according to principles that didn't align with late 18th century understanding of maritime physics, or possibly with 21st century understanding either. Something that possessed purpose, demonstrated intelligence, and maintained patterns across decades or longer. The official explanation remains atmospheric distortion. The crew testimonies remain filed as hallucination. The physical evidence remains catalogued as unidentifiable. And the Caribbean waters continue, as they always have, carrying vessels across their surface, above depths that have never been fully explored, under skies that have never fully revealed what moves between the stars and the sea.